That was my first time being in a gunfight where I'm like, there's bullets, effective fire coming back at us. It ramps up to a whole nother level. I remember kicking in doors, going through rooms, and as you go through the door, it's just like, oh my God, as you go through there. And and you're trying to go in this room and try to shoot this dude before he shoots you when he's just sitting on the other side waiting, right? So that's the fear. I mean, you've got to be on your game, because I don't care who you are. If you're not on your game, even if you are, you can still get smoked going through that breach.
Welcome to Combat Story. I'm Ryan Fugit, and I served warzone tours as an Army attack helicopter pilot and CIA officer over a 15-year career. I'm fascinated by the experiences of the elite in combat. On this show, I interview some of the best to understand what combat felt like on their front lines. This is Combat Story. Today we have part one of a two-part combat story with Mike Edwards, a former special operations soldier and leader with 18 combat deployments with the Ranger Regiment, Regimental Reconnaissance Company, or RRC, and as part of the Omega program, which, for those who are not familiar, was a joint JSOC and CIA initiative where they were paired together to form lethal operational units downrange. In this first interview, we dive into Mike's entry into the military as an 11 Mike and his first round of deployments with Ranger Regiment post 9/11, including earning what is often referred to as the mustard stain on his jump wings. After a static line jump to seize an airfield at the outset of the Iraq War, he ends up very much like Shrek did on his first combat jump, for those who remember. We dig into hunting the deck of cards, earning an EIB, then CIB, losing friends to a suicide bomber, and then the intense operation in which Mike was awarded a Purple Heart and Silver Star. Stay tuned for part two with Mike, where we dive into some of his more intense combat experiences, low-vis tactical work alongside Rodney Brown, our former guest, and fighting in Omega and RRC. Special thanks to our brothers Jack, Dave, and Dee at the Team House for introducing us to Mike. And with that, please enjoy this first episode with Mike Edwards. Mike, thanks so much for taking the time to share your story with us and coming out to our place from Alabama.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. It's so beautiful out here. The weather's perfect too.
Well, I know as we were talking, we've talked a lot about the places you've traveled in the U.S., and I know we'll get into some of the places overseas. But I know you live out in the country in Alabama.
Yep.
Grew up there, and I just wanted to get a bit of an idea of what it was like for you growing up. Like, what was your childhood like? How soon did you pick up a weapon? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I grew up living out in the country in a little small house. My parents just worked like normal parents did. Me and my brother would be out in the woods, especially during the summertime out of school. We'd be running around the woods with BB guns and pellet rifles, trying to hunt squirrels and birds and just exploring the woods. And we could go, it wasn't our property, but there was tons of land around us that we could just go back in the woods. And nobody cared back then because nobody was messing with anybody's property. So we were trespassing, but nobody really cared. My granddad had a farm, about 150 acres or so, and he had cows and stuff like that and horses. So I grew up around those, riding horses a little bit and messing with cows and hanging out with my pawpaw out on the farm. And to me, my pawpaw, my granddad, my dad's dad, to me, he was like John Wayne, like he was a cowboy, always wore the cowboy hat, cowboy boots, and messed with horses and cows and shot a lever action rifle. And he could shoot too. So, I mean, shooting skills come natural in my family, at least. So I started out on his farm when I was a kid. I remember my dad bringing me out there with a revolver pistol, and I was shooting that. And then my pawpaw had a .22 revolver that I used to shoot a bunch. And then, so I started shooting probably 8 years old, maybe a little later, but I think it was probably around 8 years old. I mean, I think first time I drove a vehicle, I was probably like 8 years old out there on the farm driving a stick shift Toyota pickup truck,
Yep. So he was effectively an entrepreneur, it sounds like.
Yeah.
Store, farm.
Yep. He had a little, it was actually pretty big for a gas station. It was at the intersection of two major highways there in Selma, Alabama. And he had groceries, like everything like you could get at Publix these days, pretty much. I mean, like meat, chicken, vegetables, like, stuff that you could cook on the stove, like instant potatoes. He had all that stuff. He also had hardware. So you could get nails, you could get hammers and stuff like that.
It's a general store.
Yeah, a legit general store. He had a delicatessen too, where he sold food. He sold some feed and stuff like that for horses and animals and stuff like that too. So yeah, pretty diversified. And then he had a farm too.
And so you grew up working on that or around it?
Just being around it.
Yeah.
You know, I was too young to really work on it, but I got to hang out around him on it.
Yeah, that is awesome. Okay, so you're growing up in Alabama. You mentioned also just before we hit record that your old man was also in the military.
Yeah.
But I think I was assuming different era. So
Yeah.
This is an interesting one I wanted to hear.
It was a real good overlapping era. So he joined the military late in life. I think he was like about 30 when he joined the military, went straight into becoming officer. Well, he enlisted, and then he did the process back then where you go in enlisted, and I think he went straight like as a PFC into OCS and did OCS, and then infantry officer basic course and did that. And back when he went to IOBC, I remember hearing the stories. It was like Ranger School back then. I mean, it was literally like Ranger School, and it should be like that now, but it's definitely not. But he went through that and then was an infantry officer for a while at Fort Benning. We were stationed at Fort Benning. So that was my first time moving really from Alabama, central Alabama, where we grew up, to Phoenix City. We lived over there.
Yeah.
And he was an infantry officer for a couple of years, and then he got out, went into the National Guard. He did some stuff working for the Postal Service as like a postmaster, which is a federal job. I guess it kind of tied into retirement stuff. I didn't know that at the time, but now I do. And then ultimately ended up going through becoming an engineer officer and then an AG officer. But he finished, I believe, his time as an engineer officer, as a full bird colonel. But that took him up to deploy into Afghanistan. So his last little thing that he did, he deployed to Afghanistan for, I think, like 9 months. And an interesting fact here, it's so sad that it didn't sync up, but out of my 18 deployments that I did, him and my brother both did one combat deployment. My brother's in the military too, helicopter crew chief on 47s.
Yeah.
And those two were in Afghanistan at the same time, and I wasn't there.
No way.
I'm like, the one time y'all go and I'm not there, and when I'm always there, you know?
Were you in a deployable unit at the time, or were you at the training house?
I was in, I was in OTC. I was in the OTC pipeline for RRC at the time. So that's why
you could not get out of that.
No.
Huh?
Yeah, a whole year soaked up in that thing.
Oh, geez. All right. So, and you mentioned your brother, and I was curious as we had highlighted him. So he ended up serving as well. Is he older or younger than you?
He's younger than me, 2.5 years younger.
So he follow you in?
He did. I don't know that he went because of me, but I don't know. He just wanted to go. I was a corporal. I remember we got a picture of me with my tan Ranger beret on with corporal rank, and he's a brand new private in boot camp, and I'm at his graduation.
That's awesome. Was that special moment for you guys?
It was. And the cool thing that goes back to when we were a kid, there's a picture that my parents have of me and him and just the regular, the BDUs that you could buy for your kids, a little button on the pocket. With us both in our little BDUs with little green walkie-talkies standing there with like hunter hats on or something. And then like 20 something years later, here we are, and it's, reversed. Now it's me and a real uniform and him in a real uniform.
Jeez. All right. And then the other thing that you had mentioned that surprised me, I mean, you're fit. Let's say that for sure. The fact that you grew up in the marching band is surprising. And that you didn't play ball down in Alabama that much.
I played baseball.
Baseball,
but not football.
I feel like it's almost like you have to play
football. It's a heresy
or something,
not to play
right?
football. Yeah.
So how did that? If you had told me tell me what Mike did in high school, I never would have said marching band.
Yeah, but that's what I did.
Did you take any heat for this? Like, did guys in the mill find out?
No, but in school at the time, it wasn't the coolest thing to do. People made fun of us, but I had my group of guys that, we played the drums, so we were drummers, and we thought we were cool because we were playing the drums. Guys would play like rock and roll music on the weekends on the drum sets and all. And a lot of my buddy Zach Coxon, he was a surfer. And he was the one I was telling you about that would be like, yeah, let's skip school and go surf, big surfer. So there were a bunch of cool guys, and I had my crew of guys that I hung out with. I didn't care about what these other people said,
And you mentioned like you didn't play football because your mom didn't want you getting hurt. And then obviously you go into a fairly dangerous career.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did that discussion go? Or maybe first question is, what made you want to go that direction? Clearly, you're in BDUs as a kid running around shooting.
Yep.
It's something there, but was there a moment where you're like, hey, I really want to go do this?
It clicked. I didn't have a push from my dad to go in the military. Obviously, my mom probably wouldn't want me to go in the military. But I was in high school and about 10th grade, I guess. And I was like, I want to do something different. So I went down to the local National Guard unit, which was actually a communications unit there in Foley, Alabama. Went up there and signed up for the National Guard and talked to my parents about it. And they were cool with it. I can't remember how that conversation went, but I didn't get any pushback. And then I ended up I did the split op program. So I went to basic training between my junior and senior year of high school. And so then after I graduated high school, I went to AIT before I went to college at Marion Military Institute. So I don't know. I just decided to do it one day.
I'm interested to hear, because I saw the Marion side, right? So you go into the ROTC program, you're in college, and then you decide, you know what, I'm going to go and I'm going to enlist instead of going through the officer route. What was the decision there for you? Was it a tough one? Who'd you talk to?
Well, honestly, I was kind of a little disgruntled with college because, I made straight A's and all the military science stuff, was in good shape, physically fit. But then it just seemed like the focus was elsewhere. They wanted the soldiers that were you had to have all the good A's in all the other classes. But if you could fail. Most of the other kids that ended up getting commissioned, well, a lot of them anyway, were almost borderline failing the military side of it, the military science piece of it. They're hanging on by a thread there. Mm-hmm. PT was horrible, atrocious. A lot of these kids barely could pass the PT test. Meanwhile, they were getting commissioned as officers. And here I am, excelling in the military science aspect, loving the field training exercises and land nav and all that kind of stuff, and was in the top, PT shape, one of the most fit guys there. And yet I was struggling in a couple other academic courses. And that's the one thing that was going to hold me back. I was going to have to go to summer school and I'm good at math, but I had a teacher that I just didn't jive with. And I think it was finite math or something like that. And I was like, man,
sounds rough.
I just don't want to do this stuff.
Yeah.
And, honestly, I was young and immature and wanted to have fun, do other things too. So I kind of got disgruntled with it and then left, went back to live with my mom, did some construction work for a while. And then it just started digging into me again. I was like, man, I want to go in the Army. So I ended up enlisting active duty to go enlisted. But
that was pre 9/11, right? So it wasn't like you had 9/11 and then you decide to get in. Yeah. So what was it that was eating at you?
The adventure piece, I guess. I was looking in an encyclopedia, those things are ancient now, Yeah. But I was looking in an encyclopedia about Hawaii, and I thought Hawaii looked really cool. And I was like, man, I'd like to go visit Hawaii. And I found out there was an Army base in Hawaii, and I said, sweet, I can enlist in the Army and go to Hawaii. So that's what I did. I actually enlisted in the Army to go to Hawaii, and I was told that I was going to Hawaii and all that kind of stuff. The recruiter got me. I get to MEPS, and they're like, hey, you're not going to Hawaii. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm on the payphone. Those things are ancient too. But on a payphone, like, hey, dude, no answer. And I'm like, well, I'm here now. I got to do it. So ended up enlisting and got Fort Benning, Georgia. So went to 3rd ID.
Not Hawaii.
Right? Yeah, not Hawaii.
Jeez. Okay. And then just before we jump into the military side, I know religion's an important part of your life today. For sure. But I think it would be interesting to kind of get some touch points as we go through this career that you have and some of the events. What was religion like for you as you're growing up and maybe getting into the Army at that time?
It was a core basis that I had. I was a Christian, said my prayers and stuff like that. But I didn't, I was kind of, I guess, more of a deist, really. I believed that God existed, even though all the church and stuff that I went to growing up as a kid, I believed that God existed, but I didn't feel that he really interacted in this world. And I didn't see that. So I just, as you get older too, you're thinking of other things other than God too. So partying, having fun, chasing after girls and stuff like that. So I did that stuff and it kind of drifted away from it. Didn't really even think about it really when I first went in the military.
Mm-hmm. So it's kind of part of your childhood, but off to the side, and then you kind of join up, and that's not really in your peripheral even at that point.
Not even really thinking about it.
Okay. So So you join up, you got the recruiter sleight of hand, which we hear often. Certainly not the worst. You go to Benning, and are you going in as an 11 Bravo or no?
Oh yeah, so I ended up transferring over to an infantry National Guard unit up in North Alabama, up in Pelham. Okay. It was the 167th, I think it was mechanized infantry. So I ended up going to AIT. I went to AIT as a mechanized infantryman. And so then when I came into Fort Benning, that's what I did. They sent me to 3rd ID. I was trying to go out to Hawaii to be a light infantryman, which back then, if you were mechanized, you could do both. So, but I didn't get that because, they needed all these mechanized guys. So I went to 3rd ID and made some good friends that I still talk to this day from there. I mean, that was my foundation in the Army. It was 3rd Infantry Division there at 3rd Brigade at Fort Benning.
But you went to Korea, didn't you?
I did after Korea. Yeah, I did a year in Korea after that.
Okay, so you're Benning, then to Korea.
Yep.
Had you been outside the U.S. at that point?
I had not. My first trip outside the U.S. was to Korea, yeah.
What was that like?
It was cool. I heard all these horror stories about guys going to Korea and getting in trouble and drinking and partying and all that stuff. So speaking of the fitness thing, I always wanted to be in shape. I figured, as a soldier, you're supposed to be in shape. That's like the key is to not just be in shape, but to look the piece too. So I started lifting weights. Like I was big into Arnold Schwarzenegger. I thought Arnold Schwarzenegger was great. I mean, we watched all of his movies growing up, yep. Commando and all Rambo movies and stuff like that too. So I saw that and I just lifted weights and lifted weights and lifted weights. And I got massive. Like I was like 240 pounds, looked like a pro bodybuilder, shredded, competing in like little amateur bodybuilding competitions and stuff.
In Korea?
In Korea.
Or like on the base?
Yeah, like on the base, like me and my buddies would always work out. And then there was this one little amateur bodybuilding competition. It was like right after I left Korea that I ended up doing and just, posing and stuff like that. And I just wanted to, I don't know, I just loved working out. And me and my buddies would spend 3 to 4 hours in the gym after work each day. And then we would still get downtown and party, but we didn't go overboard with it. And it kept us out of trouble working out instead of thinking about drinking and partying.
Yeah. Was that the first taste of adventure? Like, was it, oh, this is pretty cool being overseas and this is the right choice?
It was. I mean, Korea was interesting. I mean, it was another country. Getting to see a lot of new scenery and being around people. And then there was always that threat because the DMZ, right? Yep. And like when I went to Korea too, back it up a little bit. When I first got there, mind you, I'm an 11 Mike or mechanized infantry, but I was trying to kick that off. I wanted to I was airborne qualified because I went to airborne school while I was in Marion Military Institute. Oh, so nice. Even though I was 11 Mike, I was airborne qualified. So when I went to Korea, I said I wanted to go to that paratrooper unit. It was like our LURS unit up on the DMZ. I was like, man, I'll be right on the DMZ. I thought it would be kind of cool. But then I never got it. Like I remember I went downstairs. I think I had to be down for a formation at a certain time with spit shine jump boots or something like that. And I didn't have jump boots. And so I showed up with the boots that I had and they were like, nah.
Booted you for that?
Yeah. Like there was this, I can't remember, it was an E7 or whatever. I can't remember what rank he was. He's like, if you come down here squared away like this at this time, I'm going to inspect you. And if you pass the inspection, I'll put you in that unit. I was like, Roger that, Sergeant. Came down, but I don't think I had jump boots or something. There was something wrong with my uniform that I just didn't have. And I'm like, and he's like, see you later, can't go. So I ended up staying mechanized infantry and was in 2-9 infantry at Camp Casey. And there was, and we can pause there if you want to ask more questions.
Go for it.
But there was, we had a sergeant major that came in who wanted everybody. He was big into running, a little short black guy, super fit guy. And he was all about running. So he was like, everybody here will have run a marathon by the time your year is up in Korea. So we started off with about a 6 to 8 mile run, starting off with like a long run. We'd do PT, like normal PT every week. And then like once a month, we'd come in and do the big long sergeant major run. And they were excruciatingly slow, but long. And we did 10 miles, then 12 miles the next month, and then 14 miles the next month, then 16, then 18, then 20, 22, up by increments of 2 from what I remember each month. And every time, and the bases are so small, Camp Casey and Camp Hovey were right there together. It's so small. So you're like looping this base and looping that base and looping this base and looping that base. So every time we would come by our battalion barracks, like the formation would just sheath off. Like dudes would be, oh, my knee.
They drop out.
Yeah, dropping out. And so by the time we would finish, there would be probably less than a quarter of the battalion still left.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, everybody's just falling out. But I couldn't quit. I just couldn't quit. I never wanted to, believe me, I wanted to not run that slow. It got to the point where you'd be cramping up and stuff like that, But I think that set me up for success to go to Ranger Battalion,
I mean, I could see it being excruciatingly slow, but you probably got to see, hey, if you just work at this and plan something out right,
you can do it.
You can make it
in
the end. It had to be tough though with the bodybuilder kind of
I was big
physique.
Yeah, I was big then. So I was carrying a lot of muscle around and I'd start cramping up. My quads start cramping up towards the end. But it built in the endurance. And then, it's one of those, it's just a mental thing too. Once you've run 26 miles, it's like, well, it's 26 miles. Yeah. I've done it. You know what I mean? So
does 9/11 happen when you're there?
It did. Yep.
I don't know if I've talked to somebody who was in Korea when it went down. Like what do you remember of that? Time zone has to be weird.
Yeah, it was. I can't remember. I think it might've been at nighttime or something like that there. And I think I had just come back from the gym working out and my roommate was like, check this out on TV. And we're like watching the World Trade Center smoking and burning on fire. We're like, what the heck? Oh, we're going to war. Like we just knew we're going to war. And I had already made the commitment at that point in time to get out of the Army. I hated it. I was like, I thought I was going to be shooting guns and running around doing Army stuff. But I found out that most of what I did was like work on Bradleys as a mechanic. I was like a mechanic. I mean, we were glorified mechanics really, changing out tracks and stuff and rarely ever shooting guns. So I was disgruntled with that. But then when 9/11 happened, I was like, well, got to stay in because I got to go to war and fight for my country. That's what I came in for.
What do you think you would have done if 9/11 didn't happen and you got out? Like what would you have done for a life?
I have no clue. I have no clue. No. I mean, I literally have no clue. I don't know, maybe would have gone back to college or something like that and gotten a degree in something, but
still would have ended up in Alabama though.
Most likely. Probably. I mean, most likely.
You never know.
I'm a homebody. I love my family. I've got a really big family. Everybody in my family's close. And I love my aunts, uncles, cousins, nephews, grandparents. I love them all, and I just want to be close to them.
Just a quick thanks to our sponsor, HelloFresh, and we'll get right back to this combat story. Our family still eats HelloFresh every week for at least 3 to 4 meals. We've used it for over 3 years to help prepare delicious meals for our family of 5, and I was an avid user before they sponsored us. HelloFresh has over 45 recipes, more than 100 seasonal add-on items to choose from every week, so it's easier to find something everyone will enjoy. This is one of the main selling points for our family, the variety. It's incredibly rare for us to eat the same meal 2 weeks in a row, which used to be our lives. After a full day of work, there's still so much to do. Some days it feels like eating a wholesome dinner is next to impossible, but with HelloFresh, you can turn busy weeknights into crowd favorite meal times with delicious, practical options designed to save you time. Like their 15-minute meals, which I do every week when my kids have guitar lessons at the house, so we can eat a real meal before the festivities start. So go to HelloFresh.com/combatstoryfree. Use the code combatstoryfree for free breakfast for life. 1 breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/combatstoryfree with the code combatstoryfree. HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. And now back to this combat story. Man, so the timing of that. So that happens. Did you, as part of that decision to stay in, did you say like, I'm not doing this anymore though? I'm not staying in this track.
Yeah. I was like, I'm re-enlisting for something. So I did this Manchu Mile. It's a 30-mile ruck march that they do in Korea. And I think I did it twice while I was there, 2 or 3 times. I think I did it twice, maybe 3 times. But it just timed out that I think they did it usually once a year. And I think it timed out where I got it 2 times. So yeah, we did that. We were about halfway through that ruck march, and I was like, man, I love this. Like I always loved ruck marching. Something was peaceful about it to me, to have a ruck on and be by yourself, and then you're just in your mind, just thinking about things, and I like smelling the smells and seeing the scenery. Like we were going cross country up over mountains and down roads and through villages in Korea. So like we were out and about. It wasn't on the base. Like we went out through the city, through towns. It was almost like being part of a parade, but we're just ruck marching. You know? And I enjoyed it. And then I dipped Copenhagen back then. So I always had a dip in probably the entire time, just spitting, you know. But we got about halfway done, and I said, man, I love this. And this NCO who used to be in Ranger Battalion that was there was one of the squad leaders. He said, well, if you love this, you want to go to Ranger Battalion. And I'd already been thinking about going Special Forces. When I was at 3rd ID, I'd already taken the PT test and everything to do Special Forces. Had a date set up and everything, but then got orders to Korea, and they couldn't get me out of it. I was like, what? I thought you guys were supposed to be elite. You know what I mean? Like, you can't get me out of this. And then I found out later on it's different. You know, like I didn't realize that I always thought Ranger Battalion was something completely different. I didn't realize it was like a special operations unit, but I found out the Ranger Regiment has a lot of pull actually. And that's what I ended up doing, you know?
And it was really this guy who kind of gave you the direction for that.
Yeah. He's like, dude, you don't want to go to Special Forces. He's like, that's cool and all. He said, but they're really going to be training guys and doing a lot of stuff like that. He's like, if you're going to go to war, you want to go to the Ranger Battalion. And he said it's a quicker way to get there, because you're going to go through RASP, and then boom, you're there at the unit. You're going to learn everything at the unit and deploy with those guys. Whereas Special Forces, it's a long pipeline. You've got to go through, you know, a year and some change of training, or longer, depending on what MOS you have. And I always wanted to be an 18 Delta because I always thought the medical piece was awesome. But so I ended up going to Ranger Battalion instead.
Was that, now looking back that you know the Army so well, I mean, it seems like that suited you really well. But do you think like that SF route would have been useful for you or interesting? Or do you think you've definitely been interesting? Right,
yeah, I think I found the right one. It would have definitely been interesting. I've got a bunch of buddies who are Special Forces, and they love it too. It's just a different beast. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's some of the smartest guys I've ever met in my entire life in Ranger Battalion, but also in Special Forces. I mean, there's some brilliant guys that are Green Berets that I know. It's just a different niche, and I think the Ranger Regiment suited me better.
Yeah. Do you get any overlap between those two communities? Like, folks who are in an SF unit and then eventually matriculate over to the regiment?
They used to back in the day. I didn't know that. While I was in, it wasn't. It was like your Special Forces or your Ranger Battalion. The only guys that there were some guys that would leave Ranger Battalion because they would kind of get bored of it or whatever. They'd leave Ranger Battalion and go to Special Forces, and that suited them better. There were dudes that would get kicked out of the Ranger Regiment and they would go to Special Forces, because you had a lot of dudes in the Ranger Regiment would get a DUI or something like that, and Ranger Regiment don't tolerate that stuff. So you're see you later, and they're like, I don't want to go regular Army, so they would go to Special Forces. So a lot of guys that got booted out went there too. But not many Special Forces guys coming to the Ranger Regiment at that time when I was there. But I found out from an old Sergeant Major that it used to be that way. Like, this guy was a Special Forces Sergeant Major, but I found out he was in all the Ranger Battalions too. And I'm like, how does that work? And he would go to Special Forces, do time on a team, come back and be like a squad leader in Ranger Battalion, then go back to Special Forces, then come back and be a platoon sergeant in Ranger Battalion. He was constantly bouncing back and forth, which I think that's good, because you're cross-pollinating all that knowledge out there so that it doesn't get inbred in one unit. And they started doing that again. After I left the regiment, they started doing that again. They did an exchange program where there was Ranger squad leaders would go to a Special Forces team and be on a Special Forces team as like an 18 Bravo for 2 or 3 years. And then they would come back to Ranger Battalion. Some of them would end up staying because they liked it, it suited them better. And then some dudes, Special Forces guys, would come to Ranger Battalion, like a E6 SF guy would go to Ranger Battalion and be a squad leader. And there was dudes that stayed in Ranger Battalion, SF dudes that came to Ranger Bat, and it suited them better and they stayed there.
Yeah, I'm sure. Obviously, with your where you end up going in your career with the joint environment, you probably just saw how useful it is to be with some of these other branches and disciplines in the same unit and bringing that together.
No, it definitely is handy. because special forces guys, their world that they see is more like what RRC is done. Like RRC was real similar to special forces, actually, in the way that it was set up and stuff like that too. Different in a lot of ways as well, but it was more, those guys are working in smaller teams out there, kind of through and with the Indige, training these guys to be their counterparts and use them as a force multiplier. And we did some of that stuff in RRC. So it's like one of those things that, it's definitely beneficial to have. And I think spreading that knowledge through both of those units is good, because Ranger Battalion is an awesome unit, and there's really good at direct action raids, assault, and stuff like that. One of the things that I noticed about Ranger Battalion that I didn't like was a lot of the officers were too close-minded. They didn't want to let guys go outside the box, which that wasn't for me. That's why I wanted to leave Ranger Battalion and go somewhere else, and why I went to RRC. And, special forces is like that too. I met a lot of special forces officers that are kind of like inside the box too, but I think they have a little bit more flexibility for the most part.
Yeah. Okay. And then for people listening who haven't heard RRC, Ranger Reconnaissance Company, is that right? Right. So
Regimental Reconnaissance Company.
Regimental Reconnaissance Company. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll get to that in a bit. But you mentioned as you join up into the Ranger community, what is your welcome like at that time? So it's post 9/11.
Oh, yeah.
I imagine you go, like, at what year are you getting into the unit?
2002.
Okay, so pretty quick. Jeez. All right. So what was your welcome like?
It was not that great. I started off at RIP, and it was scary, because I heard all the horror stories of it. And I was scared of Ranger Battalion. I wasn't scared of Special Forces, but I was scared of Ranger Battalion because I just heard nothing but horror stories. And so I was like, heart beating hard, like when I go to check in, and I check in at the CQ desk, and like, there's no NCOs there. So like, nobody messes with me. It's like, okay, go upstairs, put your stuff in the barracks. But the next morning, boom, they're in there tearing us up, smoking the crap out of us constantly, just trying to make you quit. I mean, you think about, like, the Navy SEALs have Hell Week or whatever. All of RIP is Hell Week, basically. You're just getting destroyed the entire time. And it's brutal. And they're just literally trying to cut away the numbers. So I did that, ended up getting recycled initially on day one because of a vehicle inspection. Yeah. And I can't remember the exact details of it. I talked about it on Jack's show, but it was something to do with a vehicle inspection. A tail light was out, and the NCO told me that I could get it fixed later. And then it came to another NCO, and he's like, no, you got to get it fixed now. And I was like, well, this sergeant said I could get it done later. Oh, you calling me a liar? Are you calling him a liar? I was like, no, but that's just what I was told. And so I was dropped for calling an NCO a liar. And I was like, man, I really didn't mean it that way. I think they took it the wrong way. And I think they looked at me with I think they didn't like me, because I had an EIB, Expert Infantryman's Badge, airborne wings already, which everybody had airborne wings there. But I had an Expert Infantryman's Badge, which nobody else had. Some of the cadre didn't even have it. So
put a target on your back.
Yeah, kind of put a target. Yeah, most of the cadre had it, but I think there was like one or two dudes that didn't. And they were targeting me, and I was in good shape. And I tried to take or lead by example. I tried to take charge, you know what I mean? Because I was a E4 specialist and had been in the Army for a while. So I just knew, like, hey, these guys are brand new. I need to take charge. I don't think they like that. So
when you recycle there, do you have to wait around for a couple weeks, months?
No, it was a couple weeks. I think I had to wait like 3 or 4 weeks, and then I rolled right back into the next class. And then I had an even bigger target on me then, because the NCOIC that was running at the time, I can't remember this guy's name, but I can see his face. He was a mean dude. So I remember we were doing pull-ups, and we had to do the pull-ups on the PT test. And I could do 30 something pull-ups back then, just like if I wasn't being graded, I could crank out 30 something pull-ups. And I'm doing these pull-ups super easy, all the way down, all the way up. And he's looking at me. He's like, all the way down, all the way down. I'm like, my elbows are all the way down, all the way up. And he was just messing with me. I had obviously passed, and people had seen that I obviously passed. This dude comes up to me and literally just kicks me right in the chest off of the bars. Like, literally kicked me so hard. I'm talking like Chuck Norris kick to the chest. Ripped me off the bars. I fell down like how it is when the breath's knocked out of you, gasping for air. And I'm like, dang, man. And I could just tell the dude hated me. That was the NCOIC of RIP at the time. So then we get out to the Derby Queen, which is the big Ranger obstacle course out at Ranger School. We did that, and it's a pretty arduous thing. I mean, it's part of the best Ranger competition, and we're doing that thing. And as we're doing, those old Army web belts.
Oh yeah.
Well, my belt broke. The buckle broke while I was climbing over one of the obstacles. It ripped it and broke it. So my pants were falling off. And you cinch them with those things on the back, but they're still falling down a little bit. So I showed up to the bus, and he's like, "Why are your pants falling down?" I was like, "Oh, my belt broke, Sergeant." Totally respectful, but the dude hated me. He made me do push-ups again, started smoking me again. And he comes over there and starts kicking me while I'm down. I'm like, what the heck? So everybody else is on the bus. I'm getting smoked, but I just took it. And so then I got on the bus, and then I was good to go. And somehow I graduated and then went to 3rd Ranger Battalion.
Does this trend continue where people just don't like you at first as you get into training?
That was the only place. That's the only place that's ever happened to me at. And that was the guy who had kicked me out. I think he was just mad because I had convinced the holdover cadre to let me back in, to give me another shot. I'm like, dude, I wasn't trying to say anybody was lying, but I know how it is now, because I was a cadre there later on. And you're like, I used to look at dudes. I wouldn't have done that to anybody, but you can ask the guys that I put through. I was looking at everything I could to find a flaw in them. Like literally every second of the day, like watching them in formation. I would make these dudes stand in formation in the chow line at perfect parade rest, eyes straight forward. If a dude looked off to the side, I'd send him to the end of the line, make him do 20 push-ups, 25 push-ups, what it was.
You're just looking for that thing to weed
anything,
folks out.
Like just anything to mess with dudes about.
Yeah.
I mean, I would stand outside for hours just trooping up and down the lines as a cadre, or not hours, but 30 minutes to an hour, just walking up and down, walking by dudes like this close to their face, looking at them. And if they looked at me as I went by, 25 push-ups, get to the end of the line. And I'd smoke the crap out of them as much as I could. Because the way I looked at it is I was the gatekeeper of the Ranger Regiment. Yeah. And that's the way that guy looked at it. I don't think he handled it the right way, but I see what he was doing though. You know what I mean?
Oh, when you actually get to the unit, what is that welcome like? I got to imagine like they're getting ramped up for war. I mean, it's 2002. They're probably getting ready to go downrange. I'm hoping they bring you in easily, but I know some places it's a little rougher than others.
Oh yeah, it's not not easy in Ranger Battalion, especially me being an untabbed E4. So everybody that has E4 rank in Ranger Battalion already has a Ranger tab, pretty much, except for the hurt guys and the broken guys that are just kind of waiting for another shot at it. So here I am, untabbed E4. I'm just a private, just like everybody else. If you don't have a Ranger tab in Ranger Battalion, you're a private.
You're a private. Okay.
Even E5s, like we had E5 supply sergeants that didn't have tabs when I got there, and like later on as a corporal, we called them private. So I'm like, it's just a weird dynamic. It's not like that anywhere else in the Army. But I got there, and I was, like I said, I was a PT stud. Like I was always in good shape, max in the PT test. So that saved me, because that's one of the things that they're looking at. And then I was really knowledgeable about infantry tactics in 7-8. I just studied that stuff, kind of like I do the Bible now, but I was studying in the 7-8. And so I knew that stuff. So like I knew my job and I was pretty good at it. So that saved me a little bit, but it still wasn't easy. I mean, it was mass punishment all day, every day. Just there, like when there was nothing going on, they were looking for something just to smoke the crap out of us.
How much did your background as an 11 Mike help out? I mean, I understand it's not the light infantry that you wanted, but I got to imagine there's some bleed over, like that you got to see this different part of the Army and understand how certain things work. Was it beneficial in the end?
Oh yeah, definitely beneficial. I knew how mechanized infantry formations worked, you know what I mean? And that was one of the things that we were trying to do in Ranger Battalion, is take out mechanized infantry too, like to use what do they call them? Javelins and stuff like that, blasting tanks and stuff. So knowing how, not only that, knowing what their capabilities are, definitely helps you be a more formidable adversary against that.
How long do you have when you're there until you guys are going downrange?
I got there in, it was a little gap there. So for me, I got there in 2002. I think I got to the battalion right around August or September of 2002. And then everything ramped up. Iraq started ramping up. And so for me, my first combat deployment was to Iraq. I had missed 2 of them that they had done to Afghanistan already. So my first combat deployment was kind of cool. Not only did I go to combat, but I jumped into combat and seized an airfield. So I got the combat jump star on my, my little jump wings, which, that's the things that's cool. Like rare. Back then when you're that young dude, you want all these tick marks to put all over your uniform, And so I got that combat jump. And then I got my combat Ranger scroll, on my shoulder. So that was cool. We got it. And I got my combat infantryman's badge. Which back then, all you had to do was be in a combat zone. It's harder to get it now. We got ours the easy way. You just show up to combat, boom, combat CIB. And then later on, you actually had to be in a gunfight, which, I counted plenty of those later.
Yeah. Man, as far as the jump in, actually, before you get there, so you're at the unit. You missed 2 deployments, as you mentioned. How's that? Is that hanging over your head at all?
Yeah. Because these are combat killers, man. All these young dudes all been to combat. You know what I mean? Like, even though a lot of them had not even gotten in a gunfight yet, but they had 1 deployment or maybe 2 deployments under their belt. And I'm the new guy, and those had already happened before I got there. So it's like, you got to learn what it's like in combat. You know what I mean? Like, okay.
All right. Yeah.
PFCs, my buddy, Eric Frank, he's a good dude. I still talk to that guy today. He was hard on me, man. Like, that dude made me tough too. He was one of my fellow privates, but that dude was a beast, man. He's jacked dude, super good at Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and he was the enforcer of all the privates. So it was like squad leaders like, hey, you guys, like they would be mad at us or whatever. Hey, Frank, beat him up. And Frank would just like maul us, you know what I mean? So I was big and strong, so I could kind of hang with him for a little bit, but he was so better skilled at jiu-jitsu than me, and the dude would destroy me.
Did he end up going to Afghanistan? Like, did he have?
Yeah,
so he had the deployments also.
He had already been to combat. So that's what kind of reminded me of him. And he ended up staying in Ranger Battalion for a while. Ended up going to Special Forces, and is still there, getting ready to retire.
Oh, geez. All right, so he's been in a while.
Yeah.
So, if you can, talk to me about that as you're getting ready to go your first time. Like, this is early in the war. It's Iraq. People have seen Afghanistan. This is a very different fight going into Iraq. And maybe like when you learn you're going to jump in, what is that like in a unit? Is it, this is going to be awesome. Huh?
Everybody, every Ranger wants that.
You all got to want that.
Every Ranger, every airborne dude wants that, but especially Ranger Battalion. So we were in Saudi Arabia at an air base there in Saudi Arabia, just planning, and we were just doing PT and training, getting ready. The air campaign was already going on, like they were bombing stuff, and then we were getting ready to jump in and seize the airfield. And then we get a call that we got brought in. They're like, hey, we're going to jump in and seize Baghdad International Airport. And they're like, we expect 75% casualties and blah, blah, blah. Like, they were like, most of our planes will get shot down before we even get over the drop zone. It was like World War II,
yes,
like Normandy
I'm
type
envisioning
stuff.
like all of you all in an auditorium and they put up a map or something.
Yeah, and we're like, dang, this is legit. But that ended up not happening, I think, because that was a legit concern. Like the ADA fire around there would have just destroyed us coming in. So they decided to split it up, and we jumped into multiple smaller drop zones all out through the Western Desert. And I'm not sure exactly the locations of all of them. I just know that where we jumped was H1 out in the Western Desert. And that was my company, Alpha Company, plus attachments from headquarters company. And maybe, I think we probably had some combat controllers to jump in and set the airfield, because they ended up bringing in planes and stuff like that afterwards. It was a legit airfield seizure. We jumped in and turned that place into a base. And then that's the first time that I encountered like SAS dudes and Delta Force dudes and stuff like that. I'm like, oh, who are these dudes? Like older dudes with beards and stuff running around looking weird, compared to us. And yeah, it was out there in the Western Desert.
Was that they were jumping with you, or they just rolled in?
They did. They rolled in after we did. I think some of those guys were already there, maybe prior to us jumping in. I'm not 100% sure where they came from, but they just materialized after we jumped in and seized the airfield with vehicles and stuff. So they might have brought them in on airplanes or whatever to air land, but they didn't jump with us.
Do you remember how they briefed that op to you? I'm curious how mission planning evolved over those 20 years where we were at war and how quickly like we ramped up. But for a jump like that, I can't even remember the last time Rangers did a jump before that. I mean,
yeah, Panama. Panama.
Maybe.
Yeah, it would have been Panama.
Do you remember like what was it like? How did they tell you this was going to be the op? How did they brief you on it?
I remember they would lay out like a map, and then they would show the airfield, and hey, we're going to jump. This is where you're going to land. We have assembly areas that we'd set up, and we'd jump out, and we'd all link up in these areas and then move out as a fighting element. And that area was kind of like an airstrip, and I think it was just a desert landing strip. And then there was like an oil refinery type deal there. And we were to jump and seize that. I don't even know the reason why. I think just use it as a staging area.
Mm-hmm.
So we jumped into there and then linked, and it was freezing cold. I remember, and we jumped a ton of weight in. So one of the big key events, I think this is a big learning event for planning for officers nowadays. I've seen books written about this stuff now. But that jump, the weights that we jumped in broke guys. I mean, we were jumping 100-pound rucksacks, static line, and dudes are hitting the ground so dang hard. Dudes are breaking their backs. I think we had probably 8 or 10, maybe more guys literally broken and have to get medevaced from the jump. Yeah, because it was brutal, man. And we jumped low too.
Yeah.
So the plane came in from high altitude, super high, I think like 35,000 feet, dove in and pulled up right about 500 feet above the ground. And we jumped, we just like,
did you really? Out. You jumped 500 feet with that weight?
I believe it was 500 feet. And I may be wrong on it. It was at least 800 feet or lower. We jumped 800 feet all the time, but I'm pretty sure in Iraq we jumped in 500 feet. It was super low. And it was so low that we went out the plane. As soon as I went out the plane and my parachute opened, we jumped in MOP level 4 too, except we didn't have the mask on. Yeah, we were MOP level, whatever it is, without the mask. So we had the whole suit on, and then the mask was between our legs, which mine went completely between my legs. So I couldn't put my feet and knees together. So I was like, I went to grab it, to slide it around, to put my feet and knees together, already hit the ground. I mean, that's how fast it was. I broke my tailbone on that jump because I went feet, butt, head to the ground. So I remember the whole time we were there, I was having to sit on one cheek or the other. I couldn't go across like that because it was like, oh gosh, that hurts so bad.
In the flight over, I got to imagine, like, since this is right at the beginning of the war, they told you if you took Baghdad, 75% casualties.
Yeah.
Are you just thinking like, we're going into a storm here?
We thought it was going to be bad. We thought it was going to be bad, and we knew that it was different there, but we just didn't know. I don't think we had the greatest intel, maybe. But we jumped in, and not a soul out there. Like, there were some vehicles that were trying to driving away. I think they saw airplanes and paratroopers, and they were like, poof, they were out of there. So we had no resistance, but we didn't know if anything stayed behind.
Yeah.
So we cleared this massive compound. It was a compound that a Ranger Battalion should have cleared, and we cleared it with a company. And I mean, it was like well into daylight. We were still clearing stuff. And it was like every room you go in, nobody, nothing. And eventually we're like, oh, coast is clear. Let's set this place up.
Did, just before you went on that mission, did you, I don't know, write a letter home? Were they encouraging you all like, hey, have this letter on you in case you bite it?
I don't remember that. We may have, but I don't remember that for sure.
Yeah. All right. So that's a pretty eventful first op, I got to say, like, for that to be the beginning of your combat experience.
My first day in combat was a combat
That's pretty
jump.
amazing. When do you remember kind of your first time in contact? Is it during that deployment?
Yeah, on that deployment. So it was really eventful because it wasn't like it wasn't anything scary though. Like we pushed out, we had Bravo Company hitting Haditha Dam, and they were taking casualties on Haditha Dam, and that was big. And we went in, my platoon flew in, or my squad flew in to evac some of their casualties. Oof. So I was security for the 47 as we flew in, and it was kind of calm at the time, but it was kind of crazy. I see a dude coming in with his face all blown up and stuff, and they're loading him in, and we're just like pulling security outside the bird. And then you see these dudes from Bravo Company battered and torn up because they've been fighting gruelingly for like weeks.
Yeah.
And then my platoon was setting out at like we had a patrol base, like a vehicular patrol base out in the desert. We had Humvees with no armor, no doors, no roof, no windows, just like, it was like a Jeep with guns all over them out there. And we would park them, like we would find a defilade, and then we'd get down on the low ground and just pop the trucks up so that the 50 cals and Mark 19s could cover. And then we would lay down on the low ground inside and sleep until we needed to sleep, and then do what we needed to do. But we did an ambush lock interdiction mission, which is lines of communications interdiction so there was fuel trucks that were coming through, and we just set up ambushes and ambushed them, shot them all up. And it was like totally uneventful. Like we shot all the bullets, nobody else shot back, and it was done. We just ambushed people. And then after that, we were at our patrol base one time, and I remember this car pulled up. And I wasn't there at this time, but like I've heard the story. We were out doing something else, doing maybe some ambushes or something like that. While we were gone, a car pulled up, and some of our headquarters guys went up there to like see what was going on. And there was a pregnant woman that wanted some water. She's like, "Hey, I want some water." And the guy's like, "All right, come on over here. We'll get you some water." Boom! They detonated a V-bid and killed 3 of our dudes right there. So that was the first time that I'd seen like my buddies get killed. And one of the guys was Lieutenant Ripito, who I actually served in ROTC with. He and I went to ROTC advanced camp together when I was in ROTC years before. Now he was an officer. I think he was a field artillery officer. I think he was a fire support officer. And I was just a private in 3rd Ranger Battalion, and he got killed on that deployment.
And he died.
Yeah.
Oh,
got blown up by a V-bid.
Jeez. And were you watching that as that happened?
No, I wasn't there.
Okay.
But I remember we got the word, we came
this.
back, and then we're like, dang, man, 3 of our dudes just got killed.
Ooh. What?
Yeah.
And how old are you at the time?
I was probably 24, 25.
Pretty young. I mean, I guess maybe it didn't feel young at the time compared to like
I feel
18,
like a man.
19-year-olds.
Yeah, but relatively young. I was no younger than 23, 24, maybe 25.
And then I'm just trying to think, like at that age, seeing like the Bravo Company guys coming in, beat up, like face mangled. You hear about these guys dying that you knew. Yeah. Like the impact at that age.
It was real combat. I mean, it lets you know that it was real, but I don't know for me, I don't know why, if this is different for people, but for me, that just didn't affect me. It never really affected me. I was like, that's just what I expected. I kind of expected that. I expected us to lose people. I expected to kill a lot more bad guys than we did though. Like we didn't, the stuff that we did was kind of like, did I kill bad guys or like, what was that? Like, I don't even know what that was, it wasn't like a plan. It didn't seem like what I thought combat would be as far as our killing. Yeah. But we lost some of our guys, but I expected that.
And that's one of 18 deployments, right? Gosh. And the pace for that, I'm assuming with Ranger Battalion, it's shorter than a year deployment.
Yeah.
But pretty quick. Like you're back home, training up, and you're going again. Yeah,
we would typically do 3 to 4 months over. Towards the end, it got to where it was more 4 months. And then we'd be back home 6 to 8 months and then back over. So we were just constantly turning and burning. And when it went to the 4 month cycle, it was 4 months over, 8 months back, 4 over, 8 back. Because when one battalion's over, the 2 other battalions are back. And so when you go back, you've got another battalion that deploys for 4 months, and then it's your turn to deploy for 4 months. So
what was it like coming back from that first deployment? You got the combat jump, you've made it. You got to feel pretty incredible.
Feel like a hero. You know what I mean? You feel like a hero. I got these new things I can strap onto my uniform now. I've got a combat infantryman's badge, which I had dudes that were in my old unit back in the day in 3rd ID that had got a CIB from Desert Storm. And I'm like, man, I want one of those, And then now I had that thing. It was just, I remember it was the coolest thing to get to sew that big leafy badge on, Now, not only do I have an EIB, I got a CIB and a little mustard stain on my little jump wings.
Isn't it funny how important those things were?
I know, a little piece of cloth.
Just so important.
You're like walking around like this, like puffing your chest up, trying to show it off,
And the combat patch, and you mentioned the scroll, right? Like,
yeah.
Is there a ceremony that they do for that?
Yeah, I believe they did. Typically, when we get back, it was like, they'd say attention to orders, and then they would call out like it was just like a laundry list of everybody's names with the CIB, and then you get them pinned on, and then they would give you your orders for your combat jump wings and stuff like that. So you didn't get it right away, so you had to kind of wait for it a little bit. And then any Valorous awards that there would be, those would be issued out too at that time, and usually like a battalion award ceremony.
Okay. As I know you get injured, I believe in 2005, right? Mm-hmm. So you have probably one other deployment before that, or is that your second?
It was I think it was my third one, third or fourth.
Yes.
But yeah, it was pretty quick.
So if you can, I don't know if, I don't mean to jump here, but let's go to that deployment, if you can take us there, kind of set the context of what was the unit doing at that time, what was the battlefield like, and that whole rotation where you end up getting injured. What is the context around it?
Yeah, we were in Mosul in northern Iraq. We had 2 Ranger platoons at our outstation we were at, and then like a small recce team of CAG dudes, like Delta Force dudes. And we were just going out night after night after night. We were after like that deck of cards is what they call, the top like 50 dudes or whatever. And we were systematically taking them out too. Like we had good intel. This was when that intel synergy machine for JSOC really was cruising pretty good. So we were taking dudes out left and right, rolling out tons of targets. I mean, it was the first time that we had done day missions. For me anyway, most of the time it was always at night. But this one we were doing days as well. And it was brutal hot, man. It was in the summertime in Iraq. So you're talking 130 degrees. Yeah. The dudes that were going out in the daytime, like when it was your turn to go out in the daytime, you're just like, oh my gosh. It was like you're hanging on by a thread to make it through the mission and get back because you're wearing full kit body armor. So for the people that don't know, like back then our body armor wasn't as good as it is now. So it was, I remember as a squad leader, I was weighing over 300 pounds with body armor because I was like 240 pounds back then. I was still looking like big jacked dude and wearing about 80 pounds or so of kit, and that's with magazines, ammo, all that kind of stuff, grenades, explosives, and stuff like that. So yeah, I was weighing over 300 pounds just with body armor and a rifle. Back then.
And you're going out, and the 130. The daytime raid intent is they're not coming out, so it's a good time to hit them.
Well, I think we were just trying to keep them on their toes. Like we were smashing them in the daytime, so whenever they would pop, we were hitting them. And we were targeting the crap out of these dudes. So we were just staying constantly. I mean, sometimes we would leave the gates and we would hit 3 targets and back to back to back. Boom, we'd hit one. And then the intel from that, and this is how you're talking about the intel evolving, the intel from that target would drive the next mission. We would get intel from there and we're like, all right, cool. And it would confirm with higher back in the rear. And we had Strykers back then.
Oh, wow.
So we'd be on the back of the Stryker with the ramp. Well, here I am, mechanized infantry as a Ranger Battalion again. You know what I mean? And we would let the ramp of the Stryker down. We'd be sitting back there. PL would have his computer out there planning. Squad leaders would be involved planning. I was a squad leader then. So we'd be involved planning a little bit. And then, boom, roll out to the next one and hit it. And then, boom, roll out to the next one and hit it. And then back. And so the dudes during the daytime that were crushing 3 targets, man.
Smoked.
Yeah, smoked. I did it a couple of times. Luckily, when I was on the daytime, it wasn't as busy for my platoon because we changed the cycle several ways. Like it was like one time you would have days for like a week or two, and then you'd be on nights for a couple weeks. And then we started like alternating it other ways, like 2 days on and then 2 nights on, and then because dudes were just getting wrecked. Yeah, well, like you would be working days and then you'd roll into nights because dudes were just getting destroyed from doing so many days back to back to back because the heat. I mean, it was just killing guys, man.
That's crazy. I mean, we obviously in aviation, you got the crew rest thing that we're always focused on. Like you wouldn't break a sleep cycle like that. 2 days daytime, 2 days night. Like they'd be so worried to do. It was always several weeks on days, and then you kind of transition over a couple days into nights.
And that's the way they originally did it. But I think they changed it up a couple of times just because being on days for that long was just brutal.
Dang.
Yeah.
So on this op where you get injured, like what is the context of that day, that mission that you're going out on?
So for that one, there was a city called Talafar up by the Syrian border that the big army had it surrounded, but they weren't really going in there because they were just taking too many sniper shots, like that sniper guy we were talking about. But they kind of had the whole city cordoned off, and they were like, hey, we want you guys to go in there and bust it up. That's what we did a lot of times with like Fallujah and places like that too. Like the Marines would have something cordoned off and go in there and smack it at night time to loosen it up. And that's what we were doing here in Talafar. So we drove all the way up there on Strykers. I think it was about a 2-hour drive getting there, linked up with the big army commander that was like a tank commander outside of the city. Kind of briefed us on some stuff, and then we were like, hey, we're going in. Don't send any of your aircraft assets. Like they had the little Kiowas and stuff like that. Don't send anything in. We don't want to spook them. We're going to try to be sneaky, get in there, hit this one, and then just go at it. So we roll in there, hit the first target. And then as we're getting ready to stack up on the door, we were going silent, trying to silent breach. Like we use these little tools to like pry the door open, or like back in the day, we were doing explosive on everything, just boom, and then we're in. But now we had changed it to try to be sneaky, because we found out if we were sneaky, a lot of times we would get in the house and here's old boy, bad guy, sleep in his bed. And we're just like, all right, get up. Like there's no IEDs, there's no VBIDs, or suicide bombers or anything like that if you can catch them sleeping. So, or barricaded shooters, you know what I mean? So we started doing that. Well, this one, our guy was getting ready to kind of donk the door lightly to get it to pop open. And the bad guy, well, I take that back. A Kiowa flew over top. It's like, all of a sudden we get comms saying like, hey, there's dudes moving around on the roof. The sleepers on the roof are now awake. And then the door opens. So then the lead squad leader at the time, he was getting ready to go in, and the door opens and then they slam the door again. So he just yells compromise, busts right in, goes in. The dude dropped a grenade right there at the door, or had some sort of explosive rigged right there at the door. So as soon as our guys went in, boom, grenade goes off. Dudes take point blank grenade blasts to the legs and stuff. The second squad kind of like hesitated for a second. And it was my turn to be the last squad in. We used to rotate that too, so that the same squad leader being the number one guy is not getting overworked too. So I was kind of pissed because I liked being the first squad leader, but I was chomping at the bit over there. So I just blasted past that second squad, went in, started clearing the rooms. And then we hear gunshots, like machine gun fire. Can't tell where it's coming from. And that was a big pucker factor. That was my first time being in a gunfight where I'm like, dude, there's bullets, effective fire coming back at us. So it ramps up to a whole nother level. I remember kicking in doors, going through rooms, and as you go through the door, it's just like, oh my God, as you go through there. And back then we had the PVS 15s. They're dual tube night vision, but they weren't as great as the 31s that we have now. And it's hot, stuff fogs up, your eye pro is fogged up, so you can see, but it ain't always that good. And you're trying to go in this room and try to shoot this dude before he shoots you when he's just sitting on the other side waiting, right? So that's the fear. I mean, you've got to be on your game, because I don't care who you are. If you're not on your game, even if you are, you can still get smoked going through that breach. And so pucker factor, going through all these rooms, nothing in this room, nothing in that room. Then I get ready to go in this other room, and I'm stacked up on the door. My platoon leader was behind me at the time. It was literally my platoon leader was clearing the rooms with me. Super good dude. He was the guy I was telling you about on the Little Bird story.
Okay. Yeah.
So we're getting ready to go in the room, and a grenade rolls to the door. It was like clink, 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 clink. And I'm like seeing this thing, and it's almost like slow motion. And I'm like, man, I'm about to be an ugly son of a gun. I was just like thinking this thing's about to blow up in my face. But I just booted it and I kicked it back in the room, because literally like right over here were Ranger buddies of mine that were being treated by the medics that had all the wounds in their legs. I mean, literally probably from here to the fireplace were guys being treated in this little open area, but inside the house. And I was in this door, which was about where you're at, so about that distance. So I kicked it back, and then I turned and dove. And when I did, it went off and grenade shrapnel hit me in my back. But my body armor took most of it, but I got a couple pieces in my lat right here. There's nothing more than like a bee sting, just kind of like, and that's about it. Yeah.
You keep clearing?
Yeah. So I dove back that way, and then I turned back, go and clear that room, and there was nobody in there. I'm like, a grenade just came from here. It was the weirdest thing. They had tunnels, and they had like hidden tunnels inside the house. And we go in that room, like there's nobody there. And then I went to go clear this other room. My platoon leader's like, go clear that room, Mike, go clear that room. And he's like, I know a dude just went in there with an AK. So I'm going to try to clear it in pucker factories. You're like, I know there's a dude in this room. Nothing. Like literally nothing. Like they were going in these rooms and disappearing. Yeah. I mean, literally scanning the whole room. There's nothing in the room but a couple bicycles, and there's nobody. Well, then there was 2 or 3 rooms, like I think it was like 4 rooms, 2 on this side and 2 on this side, in this little courtyard with a roof over it. And then it opened up to a big courtyard. So this was kind of like the foyer of the compound. Then we started going across the open area there to clear the next room, and we were going to systematically clear it in a counterclockwise fashion. So as we go across, there's a stairwell. So one of my guys locks down the stairwell, and the rest of us keep going across. All of a sudden, we hear machine gun fire, like a burst goes off. And me and a couple other guys turned and engaged and killed those dudes that were shooting with a machine gun, or at least got their heads down. I can't remember. Like we killed them later on, but or at that time, I can't remember. But we suppressed, kept on going, and then cleared this next room. As we went in there, I think there was some women and children or something like that, but nothing else. So we're like, all right, cool. We go back out of there. And no, I take that back. There was nothing in that room either. So we go back out to go to the next room, and I'm like, "Where's my squad?" I had a 5-man squad, which back then we were running like 5-man assault teams, is what we called it, because were low on guys in Ranger Battalion. So it was an E6 squad leader, and that had like 2 or 3, maybe 4 E5s in the squad. Yeah, we were stacked though. I think my lowest ranking dude was a tab spec 4. So we go back out, and I'm like, where the heck is the rest of my squad? And then I see one of my team leaders is over there, this guy, Jeremiah Nagel. He's over there working. He was an EMT, and he was working on one of our guys who had got shot. That machine gun burst. Like I was the front guy out, and it missed me somehow. And somehow, like those prayers, like I said, my mom was praying. Somehow those bullets missed me and hit the dude behind me and hit him right in his shoulder right here. The bullet went in and ricocheted down, so it blew out his brachial artery right there. So this dude was awesome. He gauzed him up, packed gauze in there, tied his arm down to stop the bleeder, but he also took a round in the knee too. And bullets, it's like I tell people all the time, you watch Rambo and stuff like that. People are taking bullets to the chest and they just suck it up, and then grenades turn them to pink mist. It's totally the opposite. Bullets don't mess around, especially if they hit a bone. You may lose that limb or have significant issues later. Whereas like grenades, not a big deal. Like not the Chinese and Russian grenades, not a big deal. I mean, you don't want to eat one of them point blank, but if they're a couple feet away from you, it's probably not going to mess you up that bad. Yeah.
This is the op, you get a silver star on this one, right?
Yeah.
Is it part of what you just described going on, like clearing these rooms, just room after room after room?
Well, there was that. And then what had happened was, like, remember the grenade when it rolled to the door, my platoon leader dove another way into another room and ended up, that machine gun that was shot my guy was pinning them down, shooting at them. So he was taking heat from that and was not on the radio. We couldn't get a hold of him. And now I got wounded by some grenade shrapnel. So after we come back and I see one of my guys shot there, more grenades just start raining down from the roof. Dudes are just chucking them from the roof, like boom, 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 boom. I mean, just like a constant barrage of grenades. And I got hit in the arm right here with grenade shrapnel. It felt like, and that one hit the bone. The piece of shrapnel hit the bone. So it was like I had my rifle, and it felt like somebody took like a broomstick and just whacked me in the wrist with it really hard. Like it went it hurt, but it went numb kind of like right away, like bang, like dang. And so I'm like, I must be hit. And then, so as we go back, I ended up seeing the medics. They're over there with their headlamps on, checking our guys and fixing their legs, the guys that were wounded in the initial breach. And I could feel a wet stickiness all over me. So I'm like, I'm bleeding. I got to see how bad this is. So I'm like, hey, doc, check me out. And so he bandages my arm up. And then I ended up seeing that outside, the security was kind of jacked up. There was, it was kind of chaotic, honestly. There was not a command and control because the platoon leader and platoon sergeant were pinned down. They couldn't even get on the radios. Our XO was on the rooftop with a sniper team. They were pinned down by a machine gun team shooting at them. And my buddy Donald Forbes was up there as a sniper, and I remember he ended up eliminating that threat. He told me he jumped up. He was like, man, they try to peek their head up. Machine gun was just hammering. He's just like, the heck with it. Just hopped up to a knee, bam, took a shot and took those dudes out. But yeah, crazy to think about it.
So when we were talking earlier off air, you had mentioned, I don't think it was that mission, but there was a mission that I think we'll get to later where you kind of realize you're not invincible anymore. And I think it's after you have your daughter. So this is before that.
Yeah, I was young still.
But so does it start to erode a little bit of that like invincibility as you kind of you take the shrapnel, you see this happening? It
did, but not, I don't think it quite kicked in yet.
Yeah.
Well, I take that back. It did, but it made me stronger too. So with that, the one cool thing that I do remember seeing was all these young Rangers in there, like robots, like machines, just systematically clearing stuff. Like at one point in time, as I came back in from readjusting security, dudes were just doing what dudes are supposed to do. I'm like, dude, I was proud. I'm like, this is the way this machine's supposed to work. Even though there was a couple of loose ends, we tidied those up. And that's, I think, why I ended up getting the Silver Star, because I tidied up the loose ends. And not because anybody wasn't doing their job. It's just because they couldn't do their job. And I ended up stepping in because they were pinned down, But
some of the books that I've read, just kind of going through the post 9/11 era, they talk about operators in the different units and what they kind of learn and how they evolve, right? And same thing was true with aviation, but especially like you saw so much of it. That way you describe that systematic movement and how they're processing a target. Does it just get better and better as those years go on, like with the experience?
Yes.
And even in hindsight, you talk about 05, but I got to imagine by like 2009, 2010, it's even.
Oh, it was. It was amazing. To expect like the Ranger Battalion guys, man, it was impressive. When I went to RRC much later on, I think around 2010, 2011, I was over there and 1st Ranger Battalion was there. And I ended up going out with those dudes doing the battlefield interrogation stuff. And just to see them plan their missions. Like when I was a squad leader, if you were the squad leader, got to plan a little bit of the mission, like certain pieces. We were involved in all the briefings and stuff like that, but we got to plan just our little piece. But then later on in like 2010, 2011, like even privates, the lowest private was literally involved in the planning, intimately involved in the planning. They would be planning routes, or like everybody had something that they were doing, and they put it all together because we were getting a target, and from notification to wheels up was like 45 minutes. So the plan had to come together fast. So everybody had a key role. And it gives me chills thinking about it. I remember going, I'm like, these dudes are awesome. Man, I wish we planned like this when I was a squad leader. But these dudes were planning everything. It was so efficient. There's dudes prepping grenades. There's another dude over here prepping ammo. There's dudes prepping 50 cal ammo. There's dudes cleaning up the guns and touching things up. There's dudes planning, printing out all the imagery for our little armbands. There's dudes planning all the routes and programming everybody's GPS. So everybody would drop their GPS in a box. And so like we all had those little wrist GPSs. So you come into the mission, you throw yours in the box, and there was one dude that was plugging them up to the computer and downloading all the routes. And then he'd throw them in another box when they're done. So if yours is in that box, it's been jammed, and you throw it on your wrist, check it, good to go.
So all that stuff you're describing, was that like the squad leader was handling that in 05?
Back in the day. Well, we had less technology too. We didn't have as many, like we had maybe one of those GPSs, per squad, whereas then it was everybody had one. And we didn't have necessarily the greatest imagery, but it just got better and better and better.
I know that probably happens with many of the special ops units, but in particular, I think you could look at the Ranger Regiment and say, well, they're going to do stuff by the book. Like they're a bigger unit than some of the smaller special ops units. But are you surprised that they would evolve quickly like that? Is it kind of in their doctrine to...
Well, it's supposed to be that way.
Like that?
Supposed to be faster, stronger, and fight harder than any other soldier. That's part of the creed. And our guys evolved quick. Everybody, and even though, Ranger Battalion is a battalion infantry unit, we were deploying in platoon size elements. So it was still a strike force. That's what we called a strike force. So each Ranger platoon was a strike force. You had a Ranger platoon plus attachments. And it was very effective. And then, it evolved fast. Guys were, even though, we followed the doctrine, we also, that's the cool thing about Ranger Battalion. Yeah, there's Army doctrine, but we would go outside of the Army doctrine if it made sense.
Yeah.
But it has to make sense. You can't just cast the doctrine away and just be like, I'm going to do whatever the heck I want. But if the doctrine could be more efficiently done this way, then we would do it that way. So
what was if you recall, like I'm sure you hit that target and it's like another night and you got to roll back out. But do you remember, it sounds like a pretty significant fight that day that you described. That night when you're back home, or that morning whenever you get back from the op, you talking to any other guys about what went down? Like, is it different than normal?
Yeah, we were in the hospital a bunch because we had dudes wounded. My dude that got shot in the knee and the shoulder, I was in there checking on him in the hospital because we thought he was going to die. It was that bad. Like he was all poofed up, like his whole body was swole up, looked like he was about to die. And I don't know if that's because all the drugs and whatever they had injected into him, but he survived and kept his limbs too. And I was in there too. I had to get surgery. I had to get surgery to remove the grenade shrapnel out of the bone. And then I couldn't really do a whole lot for a bit. So they ended up sending me back early along with a couple other guys. So in that deployment, I got patched up and then they sent me back early.
Is that painful as a squad leader to not be downrange with your guys? Or
yeah, it's the worst thing ever, and it's stuff like it was the hardest thing to do. They're like, you can't, they were like, so that I think it was the first sergeant that came to me and said, he's like, hey man, you're going to be sitting in the JOC for the rest of the deployment. You can't go on the missions, but you can sit there. Would you rather do that or would you rather go home? I'm like, dude, send me home. I can't sit here and watch the guys go out and not go out. If I can't go out, then I'm not, I don't want to be here. So they sent me back home. We had a bunch of other guys that were wounded that needed to go back home. And like I said, my wounds weren't bad enough where I needed to go back home, but I think it was a good opportunity for me to take charge of that element that was going back home.
Okay.
So I did that. And because I was like, man, I'm not sitting in this JOC and just watching it and not being able to do anything. I'd rather not see it going on.
Yeah. I've heard that's one of the hardest things with guys who have to watch their friends, out on an op.
Especially with the combat. Like that deployment was like gunfight after gunfight. Like dudes were getting into gunfight after gunfight after that.
How much did you learn with that kind of repetitive gunfighting at that stage in your career? Like, does that just, I got to imagine your learning curve just spikes exponentially.
Yeah.
From just night after night.
Well, it did. And one of my biggest fears was IEDs, right? So we drive in Iraq a lot. It was the roadside IEDs. So we developed all the TTPs to beat them. Like, we knew, sad for the regular army, but they go slow. So we went fast and the IEDs would miss us a lot of times. So we would space our trucks out and they ended up building jammers and stuff like that we had that would block that stuff. So we were fortunate there. Right. But we would space our vehicles out. And I mean, we would be in these Strykers running 75 miles an hour through Iraq. I mean, blowing by. And we would blow by and the IED would blow up past us, behind us. We're like, dang, it worked. So we got lucky. Had some near misses, but we got lucky. Our TTPs worked. And then if that didn't work, we would change it and do something else. Afghanistan, it was the pressure plates. So what I learned to do was using my laser, walking through, I would just turn on my laser, my IR laser, and shine the ground. I could tell where footprints were. And where the locals have been walking is where I wanted to walk. So I would use that and cast a shadow in the footprints. So it was like, even though it was nighttime, I could see the footprints at a right angle. And I learned that more later on because when I was in RRC, they taught us to track. So I went to tracking schools, learned how to track people.
That's interesting.
So I used my laser much later on in my career, and I taught other dudes to do that. I'm like, look at your laser. Do this right here. You can see where the foot traffic's at. And if you see that area looks like it's brushed and swept, don't go near that place.
These guys must have been like, this guy's a ninja. This is
I don't know. I wanted to pass that on. Like I figured that out and I thought it was handy.
For sure.
Because I darn sure didn't want to lose my legs.
I never even thought it. I had never really had to, but that makes a ton of sense that you could uncover that. Oh gosh. I was just wanting to ask, Strykers. So I know you're a Bradley guy initially. Mm-hmm. Did you fight from a Stryker at all when you guys were down there, or was it just to move you to the target area?
No, just to get us to the target area. Okay. And in Iraq, in that trip in 2005, we didn't even drive the Strykers. They were just, we had chauffeurs. We had like a regular Army infantry unit, and they drove the Strykers and manned them, and then we would just hop out the back and go fight. And then it ended up morphing into where we started manning our own Strykers. And then what we started doing was putting the weapons squad leader, which is kind of sucked to be that guy, but he was in charge of all the vehicles and the Strykers because those are his guns. He's got his Mark 19s and 50 cals on there. And his dudes would man the guns. His dudes would drive. And then I think actually it evolved. So it was regular Army crewing them for us. And then it ended up us manning the guns and commanding it, but a regular Army guy driving it. And then eventually morphed into us doing everything.
Yeah. Okay. And then, so one more thing here, and then we'll take a break for a sec. Can you tell the story that you told me about that platoon leader on the Little Bird, please?
Yeah. So we were, that was up in Mosul on that trip too. We got designated as a VI team for a little bit. So VI is like vehicle interdiction. So use the Little Birds to do that a lot of times. So we were flying on the Little Bird pods doing some training. And we'd go out in the desert somewhere where there's no built up area. And we would take a case of water, like the regular like cases of water, and stuff a chem light in it and chuck it out of the little bird. And then we'd come back around and we'd shoot at it off of the pods with our rifles, just practicing on like our accuracy, shooting while moving on a helicopter. And we would do that. So we're flying around, it's freezing cold. And for those of you who haven't been on one of those, I mean, you're taking 100+ mile per hour wind straight to the face. It's a smoker. Like when you're the front guy, like I was, you're trying to like tuck up into this little hole for a little bit just to let the wind bleed off, because it smokes your abs trying to lean into that. And my platoon leader was behind me on the pod, and I used to dip Copenhagen back then, and he knew it. So meanwhile, like I'm up there and the wind's blowing in and it's going in this nostril and snot is streaming out this side of my face. And I didn't know it was going on him, but it was going on him. And we get done and he was pissed. He goes, dude, were you spitting Copenhagen spit the whole time? Because he knew like I had a dip in my mouth all the time pretty much. I was like, no, sir, I wasn't spitting Copenhagen. And he's like, something wet was hitting him. I was like, oh, I know what it was. I said snot was just streaming out of my nose. Oh, man. And he was so mad at me, but I couldn't help that. I wasn't actually spitting on him. Yeah.
I should ask, on those ops, did you end up doing any vehicle interdictions that you remember?
Yeah, I think we did one, but it was kind of uneventful. We just flew in, didn't end up shooting any fights, but just pulled some people out of the vehicles and then arrested them, basically.
Kind of land, hop out, and just pull them over. Okay.
There was a lot of good VIs that went on, but the ones that we were on, I don't remember killing anybody on any of them. I think we just detained some people.
I hope you enjoyed that combat story. We've got another one coming up with Mike next week, where we dig into several combat ops with some of the elite units that he was a part of, including an operation that he was with Rodney Brown, who you heard from a couple weeks back, also on the show, and they talk about the same operation, which is kind of interesting. So with that, I wanted to give a couple listener comments that we got. The first was from LMUSMC, and it was on the Mike Ritland episode. Obviously, Mike from Mike Drop, as many of you will know. And he says, Mike is as great an interviewee as he is an interviewer. I love his no BS stance on everything. Great interview, especially hitting the high points and letting him run with it. Very enjoyable. Looking forward to the next one. And we did a part 2 with Mike as well, which I'm sure many of you caught. And the second comment was a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and it was from Laura N0913. She says, Afghan women. Wow, that story about the Afghan female aviator was amazing. Very courageous and inspiring. That's obviously Nilufar Rahmani. Just got her book in the mail, actually signed. Very cool. Definitely recommend you get it. We covered a lot of her story in our interview, but there are so many other great nuggets and anecdotes that we certainly did not have time to cover in just 2 hours, but I would highly recommend reading. It is very inspirational about somebody who came from pretty much no opportunity into getting into the cockpit, and I don't even know what's coming next for her, but I'm sure it's something special. If you're interested in getting our newsletter, it's combatstory.com/newsletter. It's got info about our upcoming episodes. It's got a joke about the military. It's got something I've been doing this week, an episode I'm thinking back on, just a little something that we put out once a week. And if you're interested, go to combatstory.com/newsletter. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody listening in, and I'm excited for y'all to hear the next round interview with Mike. It is a really good one. And with that, stay safe, y'all.